On I-35, brake lights stream like rubies and then refuse to move, as if Austin has congealed under the afternoon heat. The highway always reminds me of blood vessels. When it's moving, you don't feel it, and when it clogs, you suddenly understand that everything you took for granted can't breathe. My left knee bounces bound there by the brake, an old nervous habit from standardized tests and college juries and board meetings where men with expensive watches nod at you until you agree with them. On the passenger seat, a paper bag from HEB with a rotisserie chicken, a half-melted quart of Bluebell, and a bunch of cilantro drooping like hair after a shower. I calculate in my head if I'll make it home before the ice cream liquefies. Then I remember there's no we at home anymore, just me and a younger version of my voice trapped in the answer phone greeting. This is the part where I remind myself to breathe through my mouth. This is the part where I try not to look at the billboard for a co-working space that says, "Find your tribe." Because once upon a time, mine included my husband and my best friend. And now I feel like the last person at a tailgate who realizes her group has decamped to a different party without telling her. The day I got fired, it rained in that particular Austin way, as if someone up there cracked open a faucet in a panic and then forgot how to turn it off. East 6th looked like it had been hosed down, the murals grayer, the pale bricks of our buildings slick and distressed. People hurried past with tacos and paper boats balanced like tiny rafts. I held the box of my personal items, the glossy ceramic mug from Mayfield Park with the peacocks on it, a tangle of charging cords, the pothos from my desk untethered from its trellis and drooping like a little green man fainting after a long run. Someone from People Ops had offered to help carry, but I said no. The box wasn't heavy, the memory of getting it was. Our company was called Kindly Minds because it sounded non-threatening, like an auntie who brings homemade cookies to therapy. We were a digital mental health platform with a team that straddled tech and care between sync-up calls and suicide prevention training. I joined a year ago. Well, 11 months and 21 days, but who was counting? Everyone. Everyone with a vesting schedule and a calendar. I used to love how the place smelled. Roasted coffee from the indie place on the corner, citrus from someone's essential oil diffuser, a faint clean whiff of new carpet. I used to love the stand-ups where we dotted the glass boards with orange and pink ideas and pretended we weren't building a business on the back of other people's pain. I used to love Monday mornings when I'd get in before most and line up my notebooks like stopwatches, ready to catch the day. Dylan would text, "Don't forget lunch, you'll forget lunch." Sienna would slack a gif of a dancing goat. It felt like before and after, shot in one frame. "Let's be adults," Ruth from People Ops had said, as if the only choices were tantrum or acceptance, as if adulthood were a posture you put on like a blazer. She had a soft voice like a yoga teacher. She had a binder and an apology and the kind of eyes that had practiced softness in a mirror. The business is pivoting to a leaner consumer product and winding down certain enterprise lines, which includes your scope. I know this is hard. You've built beautiful things. She slid a manila folder toward me as if it contained a solution, not a set of timelines and signatures. I watched it rest between us like an unexploded firework. "Ruth," I said, "I am the consumer product. You're winding down me." She didn't flinch. This was the part where I was supposed to cry. I expected myself to cry. Instead, I felt cold and very awake, like first immersion in Barton Springs in February, when your skin refuses to negotiate and your lungs like backup plans without you. Dylan had known. Of course he had. It was written in the way he didn't look up from his phone when I left the apartment that morning with my laptop bag. It was written in the way he'd been sleeping with his back to me for weeks, a harbor wall built overnight in our bed. He was the CFO. He knew the timing of everything in that office. He knew our runway and our burn and my cliff. He knew how many minutes of my life equaled what I'd given to this machine. He knew when to pull the plug. "Is there anything I can do to support your transition?" Ruth had asked, and the word support made my hands want to reach for a railing that wasn't there. "You can call it by its name," I said, too quietly. "You can tell the truth." That afternoon, instead of going home, I drove to Lady Bird Lake and parked where I used to park when I ran in the mornings.
I left the box in the back seat and walked the trail in flats and a blazer because I didn't think I needed a costume change to go grieve. The water was the color of secrets, slick and pretty, and refusing to tell you what it had swallowed. Canoes slid across like telephone calls you couldn't hear. The town was full of people who moved here because they wanted to be some future version of themselves, and now they're all learning that the future likes to move the goalposts. At the lacy rest of the pedestrian bridge, I stopped and watched a guy with a man bun and a pit bull pause to take a selfie. Behind him, the skyline had the look of a promise, cranes beaking at the sky, glass panes catching a sunset that had the decency to show up even when you didn't. Sienna had texted around 2 p.m., a single polite sentence that wanted to be both condolence and boundary. "Can we talk when you're ready?" It vibrated like an alarm on my wrist without touching my skin. I turned the phone over and pressed it to the bridge rail until the chills sank through to my palm. Sienna Park and I met our first year at UT, an overfull lecture hall in mezzes where a professor wore cowboy boots with a suit and told us about the American mind like it was a terrain you could map. We shared an extra chair and a contempt for the way girls had to raise their hands higher to get called on. We shared vintage dresses and midnight burgers at P. Terry's and the kind of fights you don't admit to anyone but the person you feel safest with. We got drunk on the floor of my apartment the night Dylan kissed me in a field behind the Long Center, fireworks sputtering like punctuation above the city. Sienna had been the first to see us become us. She'd said, "He has the eyes of a person who will take care of it."
When Dylan and I married at the Driscoll, Sienna held my bouquet, and Dylan's mother cried into a linen napkin, and someone's toddler crawled under a table and refused to come out. I remember the smell of lilies and whiskey. I remember the music swelling at exactly the right time. I remember looking for my father out of habit, and then remembering he was back in Ohio, 5 years sober and unwilling to sit in a room with that much champagne. He didn't know how to be halfway to joy. The week before, Dylan and I argued about taxes in the car with the windows up. We made up in the parking lot like teenagers. We told ourselves the fight was about logistics. It was about control. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely announces itself with a thunderclap. It collects receipts in your blind spot. It lives in the hum of the dishwasher cycle you can't hear over the TV. It's the voice in your head that says, "Don't be dramatic, be reasonable, be adult." It's also the voice that says, "You're overthinking this," which is how men who prefer to underthink win arguments they shouldn't. I had my first real suspicion a month before the box, with Sienna. We were at Radio Coffee, at one of those picnic tables under the live oaks, iced coffee sweating on napkins. She was wearing a white dress with tiny blue flowers, like sky pricked by birds. She was doing that thing where she set her phone face down and reached to look at it every time it buzzed, an apology in the gesture before she made it. "Just pre-launch jitters," she said, too casually. "My team keeps pinging me about the brand guide. It's a miracle anyone in that place can type without supervision." "How are you sleeping?" I asked, a question I had learned to mean, and one that sometimes loosened people's hands. Sienna liked to treat my curiosity as a trick, a glass of water with a trapdoor. "Like I stole something," she said, then laughed at her own joke, except the laugh sounded like cardboard bending. "Kidding, you have that therapist head, Eliza. It creeps me out." "I don't tilt," I said, tilting. She moved her eyes over my face and smiled, forgiving me for a wrong I hadn't named. What I remember next is the moment she went to the bathroom and her phone lit up with Dylan's name. The buzz trailed itself across the tabletop like a cat rubbing its face on a leg. The message preview was turned off. The photo of Dylan, selected by me a summer ago, the two of us at Hamilton Pool, his arms brown and out wide, like he knew the world had a place for him. I looked away. I counted to 30. The instinct to respect privacy feels noble right up until the moment you discover privacy has been used like a blanket to smother you. When she came back, she flipped the phone face down again with a little shrug. "Work," she said. "Everything's on fire." A week after that, Dylan's car smelled faintly of Sienna's perfume, the one I bought with her at Austin Perfumery, the one that smelled like citrus and bruised rosemary. He said it was from the car wash. He said the girl at the desk wore something strong. He said I had a nose like a bloodhound.
He kissed my forehead in a way that meant to bless me and ended up marking me invisible. There's a moment when you understand that the people you trust have already voted in a referendum about you, and the result is final. It doesn't come with music. It arrives as a series of things that, taken together, tell a story you can't unknow. The night before my exit interview, I found a folder on our home laptop labeled Finance_July. It opened to a spreadsheet. Dylan never remembered to log out of anything. The screen blinked like a lookout tower. Rows of numbers came into focus. Q2 growth rates, cohorts, retention metrics, ARPU. And then a separate tab, Grant_reporting. I clicked it because
I'm angry, I said, in case clarity could be a kindness. He rubbed the bridge of his nose like a person negotiating with a migraine. Just don't make a thing of this, Lizzie, he said, and the old nickname rubbed like gravel. Let us take care of you. Take some time, reset, don't burn anything down. I'm not the one striking matches, I said, but too softly for it to count. People like to tell you that closure is a door you can just decide to shut, as if there isn't always a draft coming under it, as if the latch doesn't sometimes fail. I didn't sleep. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling fan saw the air into slices. I listened to a neighbor's car alarm hiccup once and then die. Sometimes I whispered the names of streets to myself like prayers. South Congress, Enfield, Koenig, Burnett. Sometimes I imagined driving until the city gave up and the sky took over. Sometimes I imagined a life in another state, the kind of crisp place with barns and tractors where people don't use the word burn rate, except when they're talking about brush. But I am a person who believes that if someone lights a fire in your house, you don't leave, you get a bucket. In the morning, I went to Barton Springs at opening like I used to when I needed to remind myself that cold can be a discipline. The water hit me so hard my teeth hurt. A man in a neon cap swam past me with the inexorable dignity of a swan. The sky was bleached, the lifeguard in her hoodie looked like she was biting back a yawn. When I swam the length of the pool, my skin turned that pink that only Texans in winter achieve. On the return lap, I let my brain do what it does. It started building a map. I am not a hacker or a spy or someone with friends in high places. I'm a product manager who reads footnotes for fun. I write emails that are both polite and impossible to ignore. I make lists. I understand how incentive structures warp a thing until it is no longer the thing you made. If you want to get back at the people who broke your life, you don't pick up a rock. You pick up a pattern. Back in the car, I opened my notes app and wrote, "What do I know?" Under it, I typed, "One-party consent in Texas, record calls if I'm on them, confirm. Our grant is HHS, reporting anomalies, outcomes versus raw data mismatch. Dylan comment, we'll reconcile in Q4 when we have more bodies. Sienna, comms, tight with donors, press list, brand image. If they're prepping an announcement, there's a timeline they're protecting. HR severance doc, look for non-disparagement clause. Compare to SEC safe whistleblower carve-out. They always forget that file. Mix panel export. Screenshots of deltas before they revoke access. Eliza, check your access." It wasn't a plan yet. Plans are scaffolding. This was more like laying out the tool belt. The trick would be to move quietly. The trick would be to not let my pain be the most compelling thing about me. At home, the apartment was that particular early spring bright, all glass glare and shadow. The plant on the windowsill leaned towards the light it liked best. My laptop, my own, not the company's, hummed like a patient animal. Before I let myself cry, and I did, eventually, into the sink while I washed blueberries, because that's where the crying came, at noon, Dylan called from his office, the one with the view of a condo that went up in 6 months like a time-lapse cloud. I hit record and felt a petty pride that I remembered to. "How are you?" he asked, the phrase stretched thin so you could see the wires beneath it. "How do you think?" I said, not mean, just not performing the maintenance he required.
I want you to know this wasn't personal, he said. We needed to make changes so the company can survive. Your role, look, I tried to fight for you. It was consensus. Consensus, I said. That word makes you feel like the weather, doesn't it? As if things just happen around you? Eliza, he said, like he was asking for a favor. Please, don't do the thing where you make it moral. It's business. There's no villain. So why do I feel like a body? I said. The silence that followed felt like we had finally told a truth. It felt like a woman standing in the middle of a room and pointing to the table and saying, "This is not just a table. This is where you eat me." "I'll take care of you," he said. "We'll make sure you're okay. I want you to be okay." "You can take care of me," I said, "by not lying to me." He breathed out. He said my name once, not like a question, not like an endearment. When we hung up, I stacked the dishes from breakfast. I arranged the box from my office on the coffee table and took the things out one by one, as if the order in which they came into my life mattered. The peacock mug, the employee badge with my picture slightly tilted, the little rock I kept by my keyboard, picked up from the Blanco River on a day Dylan and I turned our phones off and pretended that the world could not possibly need us. The rock had a thread of quartz in it, a scar of white through gray where someone larger, slower than us made a decision 1,000,000 years ago. In the afternoon, Sienna rang the buzzer, and when I didn't answer, she texted a picture of her hand with the small scar on the thumb she got slicing a bagel in sophomore year. The caption said, "Me, outside, please." I let her up because I am not a monster, and because sometimes you have to look at a person's face before you can let them out of your head. She smelled like the perfume and like lemons. She wore jeans and a sweater that looked deliberately casual, like a person playing a role. She stood in the entryway and blinked back whatever her eyes were doing. She started to sit on the couch and then didn't. If I'd been a different kind of person, I would have made tea. I had the sense that whatever she wanted from me hinged on small things like what I did with my hands. "I didn't know they were going to do it today," she said. "I swear to God, Eliza, I found out this morning." "They?" I asked. "The exec team, Dylan, the board." The order of her list was a betrayal all its own. "Tell me what you think you're apologizing for," I said, a line that came out more therapist than friend. She swallowed. She looked at our framed wedding photo on the bookshelf, the one where Dylan has his hand on the small of my back, and I have my mouth open in laughter at something I can't remember now. "There's no way to say this," she began, then shook her head like a swimmer dislodging water. "I'm sorry, okay? For all of it. You don't deserve." "You can take the apology," I said, calm like the surface of a pond when you can feel the carp rolling underneath. "I want something else." "Tell me what," she said, relief flaring in her too quickly for it not to be about her. "Start with the grant," I said. "Start with what you know we're telling HHS that we can't prove." Her face did a little dance then, an internal fight waged purely in the muscles around her eyes. She turned towards the window to look at the slice of city we got for the rent. She put her hand in her hair and pulled it free, and did it again, like a person knuckling a bruise. "I write copy," she said finally. "I pitch. I don't do spreadsheets." "You know enough," I said.
"I know what we talk about when we talk about retention," she said, giving me a gift wrapped in deniability. "I know Dylan thinks the ends justify." "Are you sleeping with him?" I said, because silence makes cowards of us, and also because I needed to hear from her mouth the thing I believed, to stop conferring on it the status of rumor in my own head. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet like the ends of a popsicle. She nodded, twice, small, like apology, like surrender. The fact that she didn't say anything long was, perversely, a kindness. "How long?" I asked. "A while," she said. "I can't. Don't make me give you the timeline like I'm writing a press release, Eliza." "You owe me time," I said. The back of my neck went cold. My hands felt capable of breaking something delicate. It didn't start as she started, then stopped. "We were lonely and maybe the same kind of greedy. I loved watching you make things. I loved his mind. I thought I could hold the contradiction without it owning me. I should have known better." There it was. Not an excuse, A confession. It didn't change the nature of the fire. It made a map of the forest. "I'm not going to scream," I said, and I meant it. "I'm not going to throw you out. I'm not going to do anything you expect me to do. I am going to ask for the truth, and then I'm going to make decisions that will look like revenge if you need to name them that." "Eliza," she said, reaching, and I stepped back because my body had learned that language now. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make it so that if you tell yourself a story about me," I said, "that story has to include the law." She flinched. Maybe at law, maybe at story. She had built a career on managing narratives, spinning reputations out of air and grit. She had built one of the only ones that mattered to me, the one where I was a person whose loyalty was seen as a virtue, not a resource. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, and the absurdity of that line almost made me laugh. "You already did," I said. "Now we're choosing what kind of people we are after." When she left, the apartment regained a shape. Light moved along the wall like a hand. I stood in the kitchen and drank water that tasted like the inside of a garden hose, and tried to memorize the feeling of not doing anything dramatic. My phone lit up with an email from Ruth with subject line, "Severance Agreement and Release." I opened it. I read it like a book review. Non-disparagement, company property, confidentiality. Here it was. Carve out. "Nothing in this agreement shall limit your rights to communicate with governmental agencies, including the SEC, EEOC, NLRB, HHS, OIG, etc." Quiet language, but there, stately. The path. After dinner, alone, I drove to the HEB, because there's a comfort in fluorescent lights and chilled aisles that feel the same whether you're 13 or 33. I put things in my cart with the attention of a person relearning gravity. Limes, tortillas, chicken, that ice cream, cilantro. I stopped at the end of an aisle to watch a mother ask her kid to put the Lucky Charms back, and watched the child do it without being promised anything in return. A negotiation made of pure respect or maybe just exhaustion. At checkout, the cashier said, "How's your day?" And I looked at him like a person who had been asked what it felt like to survive a tornado. He was maybe 19, with a mustache he was very proud of. I said, "It's almost over." He said, "Aren't they all?" He made me smile. He bagged my groceries with care. He made sure the eggs were on top. Sometimes that's the whole kindness. On the way home, the highway moved. The rubies uncoagulated. The city's lights came up like applause. The second morning, I woke up with my heart already sprinting and my body not yet invited. Sun climbed up the blinds like someone was pulling a beaded curtain. On my nightstand, a glass of water with dust freckles waited for me to admit I wasn't a person who made righteous choices in my sleep. Dylan had left early. The coffee machine had done its single-serve burp and shut down, proof the house still knew one of us and didn't recognize the other. I checked the severance agreement again like a person who keeps testing a sore tooth. It was still there. It was still neutral and clean and full of the words of people who can make moral decisions sound like logistics. I let my finger sit on the page where it said I couldn't disparage kindly minds in any form, and then on the sentence that said, like a small door in a big wall, "Nothing in this agreement shall be construed to limit your ability to report possible violations of law or regulation to any governmental agency or entity, or to communicate with such agencies." Sometimes paperwork is a threat with a map drawn on it. I made coffee I didn't want and took it out onto the stoop where the concrete had held the night's old cool. A woman pushed a stroller past. The baby's feet were bare, soles like pink stamps. A mockingbird did a string of impressions half convincing enough to make the tree sound haunted. I told the coffee about a lawyer named Someone Who Will Tell Me I'm Not Crazy, and my phone obligingly offered me a list in the way algorithms pretend to be your friend. I made a short list. Employment law, Austin. Whistleblower, Quitam, HHS. Free consult, not because I needed free, but because I wanted a lawyer who knew what it was like to hear a story and get to the bones quickly. By 10, I was parked in front of a bungalow in East Austin that someone had sanded down into adulthood. Bright door, potted jade by the steps, a little sign that said Vega and Ford, Employment and Whistleblower. Inside, the air smelled faintly like citrus and toner.
The receptionist had a soft halo of hair and a pen she clicked hard when she smiled. I sat where you sit when you've rehearsed the speech you will give to someone whose job is to wait you out. Marisol Vega came out in navy and flats, hair swept back, no jewelry, the kind of woman who could explain bad news without making you feel like a child. She shook my hand like my hand mattered. Her office had diplomas and a framed drawing by a kid, stick figures, a house with a triangle roof, the word mom in heroic letters. She sat. She said my name like she was putting a pin in a map. "Tell me the story the way you would write it if you had to make it boring," she said. "Then we'll find where it's interesting." So I told her the boring version: dates, job, firing, vesting schedule I'd been 8 days shy of, the grant whose outcomes had been massaged until they lost their shape, the Slack exports, the mix panel data, the spreadsheet comment with Dylan's initials like a smudge. I did not say my husband's name until I had to. I said CFO, like I could make the political by rebranding it. She wrote while I spoke, not dense notes, but arrows and a few quick words, as if building a scaffolding where my house had used to be. "Okay," she said when I reached the end I had rehearsed, "a few lanes. Lane 1, employment. Texas is at will. They can fire you for any reason or no reason so long as it's not an illegal reason. Firing to avoid your vesting cliff is ugly but not necessarily illegal, unless the equity was already earned, which, from what you've said, it wasn't. There are exceptions. If you can tie your termination to your refusal to commit an unlawful act or to protected activity. Think discrimination complaints, wage claims, things like that." "I didn't refuse anything," I said. "I didn't know enough to refuse." "Right," she said. "So lane 1 is uphill. There may be a contract argument if your offer letter, handbook, or Slack messages, yes, sometimes those count, created an expectation they then breached. It's a long shot. We can pursue it as leverage if we..."
She smiled, and it was an expression that knew some things about blowing up. "A quit ham complaint is filed under seal," she said. "It's quiet at first. DOJ investigates. They might intervene, they might not. There are anti-retaliation protections under the FCA. If you choose that path, you cannot talk about it broadly. You become secretive in ways you will hate, but you'll be doing it the way the system expects, the way you said you wanted, smart, not loud. Meanwhile, there's the administrative path with HHS OIG. Tips, documents, your comparisons. They can audit, they can subpoena. You do not have to set yourself on fire to warm anyone else." "I have a severance agreement," I said, and slid it across the desk. "They want me to sign. There's the carve-out." She scanned with the efficiency of someone who had seen this template so many times she could read the white space. "This is standard," she said. "Take your time, don't sign until we've decided your lanes. Don't tell them what you're doing, and stop accessing any systems that are not yours. If your credentials still work, good for you. But if you access once your access has been revoked, that's where the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act starts breathing down your neck. Download what you have, but don't go fishing." I thought of my fingers on the keyboard like a child caught with a hand in a jar. "I recorded a phone call with Dylan," I said. "I was on it. Texas is one party." "Correct," she said. "Keep recordings organized, date stamp them. Keep contemporaneous notes: who, when, where. Courts love contemporaneous. Government agencies love order. It makes you look like what you are, not vindictive, but careful. Also, if you suspect your husband's relationship with your friend compromised decisions that affected you, that matters for the story, but it's not illegal on its own. Don't over-index on the sex. Focus on the sentences that can be read out loud in front of a judge without anyone needing to take a shower." She said it kindly enough that the joke slid in and wiped its speed instead of tracking mud everywhere. "Do I tell the board?" I asked. "There's a woman, an independent director, who cares about optics." "Not yet," Marisol said. "Boards protect companies, not you. You can send an internal complaint later if we want to document notice. For now, we preserve and choose venues that keep you alive. Also, you need to take care of your money. New bank account if yours is joint, new passwords, two-factor authentication, get credit reports. When people feel cornered, they do things to show they still have power. Don't let the first domino fall in your living room."
Thank you, I said, and I meant it like a prayer. Will you take me on? She held my eyes for a count. I will, she said, with the understanding that the FCA/quit-tam lane is under seal and will be slow. The employment lane we can use to push for a cleaner, more generous severance. The HHS OIG complaint we prepare this week. Send me your exports today. Don't send anything that belongs to them you obtained after you were terminated. Keep everything on a separate drive. Assume they can subpoena your cloud. On the way out, I signed an engagement letter with a hand that trembled just enough to make the loops of my signature look like someone else's name. I sat in my car and cried a small cry that had the satisfaction of a muscle releasing. I felt not avenged, not even safe, just no longer alone with the problem. The day asked for normal tasks and I gave them willingly. New checking account at a credit union in a strip mall next to a nail salon and a dog bakery where a brunette laughed as she arranged iced cookies shaped like bones. Password manager installed, 2-factor codes printed like a grandma, and put in a Ziploc in the freezer behind the bag of peas because the internet had taught me that freezers don't burn. Annualcreditreport.com, all 3 bureaus, a scan through transactions with the squint you use to spot a friend in a crowd. I texted my landlord. I told him I might need month to month. He sent a thumbs up that felt like an absurdly generous gift. At 2, I had my exit interview on Zoom with Ruth from People Ops and a man named Joel from Legal, whose voice wanted to be friendly and kept bumping into the edges of policy. I put my AirPods in, I closed everything else, I hit record on my phone, which propped against a mug like a student doing a magic trick. We appreciate your contributions, Ruth said, as if we were all gathered around a casserole and someone needed to say grace. Can you define transition here? I asked. I've been terminated. Transitions can be difficult, Joel said, as if I hadn't used his real word. We're here to answer questions.
I asked about cause and without cause, and Joel said budgetary constraints and strategic realignment and role redundancy. And I said, did the timing of my vesting cliff play a role? And Joel said, with a straightness that felt like practice, no, that was not a factor. And I let the silence sit there long enough that it became a third person on the call. I asked how many others had been let go and whether my portfolio would be maintained. Ruth said, we cannot discuss other employees. And I said I understood and repeated the question another way until she gave me the number 5. I asked to have written confirmation that I had not been terminated for performance reasons. Joel said, we can add clarifying language to your separation letter. I asked about my responsibilities under the agreement, and Joel recited them. When it was done, Ruth said, how are you doing? As if she had accidentally spilled the personal into the professional. I said, I'd like my final pay to include the PTO you show on my last pay stub. Joel said, yes. When I hung up, I sat with the little hum of the computer like a dying neon sign. My phone buzzed with a text so brief it had to be urgent. Can we talk? It's bigger than you think. Priya. Priya had joined Kindly Minds 6 months after me, a clinician with a resume that looked sewn together out of 2 people's lives, community mental health in San Antonio, then a policy fellowship in D.C., then back to Texas because her mother had gotten sick. She had always looked like she was thinking about something she couldn't figure out how to explain without building a new vocabulary first. We met at Epic Coffee, where grad students marinated and dogs napped under chairs. She wore a denim jacket and the tired of someone who had slept in a chair next to a hospital bed. Her hair was in a knot that refused aesthetic correction. She stirred her tea like she was trying to hypnotize herself, and then stopped. I shouldn't be talking to you, she said, and looked genuinely spooked by the fact that she was, but I also can't not. I won't record this unless you want me to, I said, and I meant it. She nodded once, grateful, and I put my phone face down under my thigh. We have safety net clients in 2 school districts, she said, neuroses pressed down under the white paper of her voice. We do screenings. We promised the districts we would push acute risk to a hotline within 2 minutes, every time.
We've been missing the 2-minute window. They changed the clock. They didn't tell us. They moved start time to when a junior triage person opens the page, not when the kid presses "I need help" on the screen. My stomach did the drop it does when a roller coaster realizes gravity is not a rumor. Who changed it? I asked. Ops, under Dylan's directive, she said, the name landing like a metal spoon in a glass. He said we needed to align metrics with investor expectations. He said kids were on TikTok anyway, and 3 minutes versus 2 didn't change outcomes. He made a shrug with his entire body. We have a 14-year-old in Fluggerville who waited 6 minutes for a live human because align. The school is asking questions. They like me. I like them. I don't want to lie to them. Did you write any of this down? I asked. I wrote it in emails that I saved and then somehow they were gone, she said. But I have drafts. I have the original playbook. I have the clinical escalation logs. I have a screen recording of the dashboard before and after the change. I could feel the plan rearranging itself to accommodate a new, heavier truth. I could also feel the part of me that would have liked to vomit in the bathroom and then climb into bed. Both feelings are information. Both are useless if you take them personally. Priya, I said, I'm talking to a lawyer, a good one. This is beyond employment. This is HHS OIG. This is possibly a school board that needs to know it was sold a thing that broke at the point where it couldn't. If I go this route, it will be under seal. It will be slow. It will also be real. I don't want to be a whistleblower, she said, and smiled at how small and childlike she sounded to herself. But I also want to sleep. I haven't slept. We can write a memo, I said, because emails make accusations and memos build arguments. We can strip it of adjectives. We can let the nouns carry the weight. We can show the delta between the old clock and the new one in a way that doesn't require trust to believe. She laughed once, sharp. You always did know how to make a sentence do something it didn't want to do.
At home, I opened a fresh document and titled it, Kindly Minds Internal Timeline, Eliza Moran. I built it like a house with straight corners. Date, event, who, what changed, what evidence. No commentary. At the bottom, I made a section called Glossary because if you're going to invite strangers into your private hell, you might as well give them a map. I defined things like active user and 2-minute escalation and safety net and HHS outcomes reporting. I put the screen captures next to the exports like you would label photographs of a crime scene that you're trying not to overdramatize. At 6, the HOA of our building met in the clubhouse under fluorescent lights that gave everyone the color of an unripe avocado. I went to be around people who cared deeply about pool hours and dog waste bag stations. There is a kind of relief in listening to problems with finite solutions. A retired accountant named Hank argued about the budget for resurfacing the tennis court with the kind of passion I reserve for things like ethics. A woman named Kat with a nose ring advocated for a community compost pilot. I sat at the back with a paper cup of orange soda and let the pettiness rinse the edges of my day. At the end, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and sharp brown eyes introduced herself. I'm Marta, she said, Unit 3C. I used to audit grants for the state. You looked like you were taking better notes than Hank. That's not nothing. Old habit, I said. I'm Eliza. You're new to coming to these, she said. Friendly, not nosy. People don't show up until something hurts. That seems to be how we're built, I said. She tilted her head. You want a thought you didn't ask for? Always, I said. If there's something going on you think is wrong and you want to tell someone about it, write it like you expect it to be read in a deposition by someone who hates adjectives, she said. Attach exhibits, number them, don't bury your lead. And if you send it to a board, CC counsel. Boards take things more seriously when their lawyers see them. She tapped her temple. Old job, bad habit. I smiled like a person who had been handed a tool they already knew how to use ideologically and was now willing to pick up literally. On the way back upstairs, I passed Dylan in the stairwell, his face doing the careful arrangement it did when he wasn't sure which version of himself would serve him.
He put his hand on the rail and didn't move. "We should talk," he said. "You can't go nuclear here." "I don't know the exact size of the bomb I'm building," I said. "I only know I'm going to stop pretending you didn't light the fuse." He looked tired in a way I recognized, the tired of a man who can only win if everything remains ambiguous. He put his tongue in his cheek and let it sit there like a placeholder for wit. "I'll make sure your COBRA paperwork is expedited," he said, "because when a certain kind of man can't fix the moral thing, he will fix the paperwork and expect gratitude." "I'll make sure the paperwork is correct," I said, "and that the outcomes we sell to schools match what kids get when they press the button that says help." He flinched, small, involuntary. It was the first tell that told me he knew exactly what I knew. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. "You didn't," I said. "You wanted to hurt the part of me that makes you answer to something bigger than yourself." In my apartment, I stood at the window and watched a boy in a Superman t-shirt chase pigeons around the courtyard, his cape pretending to be wind. My phone pinged. An email from a board member's assistant responding to a benign note I'd sent weeks ago about a panel on ethics in AI that I'd been asked to join and now wouldn't. "So sorry to hear of the changes on your end. Best of luck." It turns out, best of luck is what you mean when you no longer have the keys to the room where we make decisions. At 10, I opened the HHSOIG website and read the words on the screen like they were liturgy. I copied and pasted the hotline number into my notes. I drafted a cover letter with bullet points that made me feel like a bureaucrat in the best sense, succinct, supported, the opposite of hysteria. I named the grant award number. I attached the Excel comparisons. I attached the dashboard screen captures Priya had sent. I wrote one sentence I hoped would act like a magnet in a drawer of loose nails. "This report is being made in good faith by a former employee under the belief that false statements may have been made to a federal agency to obtain or retain funds."
I did not send it. Not yet. Marisol wanted to run her eyes over every comma. I felt a small, mean joy in knowing that my commas would soon be the subject of a conversation between people in suits. That night, I boxed the rest of my desk things I had taken out of the office box and realized I was staging my own small inventory of a life. My wedding album, 2 cookbooks with oil on the garlic pages, a postcard from Sienna from Taos with a smear of blue like sky on a day that looked like it could only be ordinary. I put the album back on the shelf. I left the postcards face down. When I lay in bed, the ceiling fan did its quiet insistence thing. Somewhere, someone's phone vibrated like a bug that wouldn't die. I thought of the kids in the schools with those glossy posters on the wall and the app on their tablets that promised help in language that had been A/B tested until it was as adhesive as a pop song. I thought of 2 minutes. I thought of 3. I thought of 6. I thought of the sentence Dylan had written in the margin of a spreadsheet. "We'll reconcile in Q4 when we have more bodies." I rolled the words in my mouth. Bodies. What an apt choice for a mental health company to make when what it meant was people whose pain we sold as a product. My mind made a list of bodies I could account for. Mine, the 14-year-old in Pflugerville, the woman at the checkout with the little scar on her thumb, the girl in the stroller whose feet had still been pink with undeclared future. I felt something that was not rage and not grief, more like alignment, like a chiropractor had cracked something that had long been crooked and now the air could move between the bones. Blessed are the receipts, I thought. Blessed is the law. Blessed is the boredom of doing the next correct thing. Blessed is the quiet that will come after I stop talking to anyone who cannot help me and start talking to the people who can. Outside, a siren went past, soft, and then tore itself open. Somewhere, a dog barked like an old instinct. I turned my phone face down. I slept in small slices. Morning, inevitably, came. The garbage truck made its slow baritone through the alley like a ritual, hydraulic arms embracing bins with a tenderness that would be funny if you weren't thinking about what we do with things we call waste. Morning smelled like cedar after a light damp, Austin's compromise for not having 4 seasons.
I stood at the kitchen counter with a legal pad and wrote out the bones of requests, my coffee cooling into adulthood. I'd pulled up the Texas Attorney General's page on the Public Information Act and found the tone I would borrow. It was officious in a way that is actually reassuring. This is not personal, this is the right of the public. I made a list of the districts Kindly Minds called safety net partners. Pflugerville ISD, Del Valle ISD. I added the charter we'd pitched and lost, and then somehow got back. I copied language like a student learning a new grammar. Pursuant to the Texas Public Information Act, Tex Gov Code Chapter 552, I request the following records for the period January 1, 2023 to present. 1. All contracts, amendments, and MOUs between the district and Kindly Minds Incorporated. 2. All communications, including emails, text messages, and memoranda between district employees and representatives of Kindly Minds Incorporated. 3. All incident or escalation logs related to student use of the Kindly Minds application. 4. All performance or outcomes reports submitted by Kindly Minds to the district. And 5. Any internal district policy documents referencing response time requirements for mental health vendor triage. I wrote it twice, once for Pflugerville, once for Del Valle, and looked at the sentences until they were so spare you could see the sky through them. I added willing to pay up to $50 because this is a world where you pay to see your own reflection. I asked for electronic copies. I put my name at the bottom like a person who wasn't afraid of her name. By 10, I was in the UT campus library printing on a student's friend's card because the printer at the apartment had decided its role was purely decorative. The Perry Castaneda Library hummed with undergrads in burnt orange and folks with expensive noise-canceling headphones pretending to read while dispatching texts with thumbs that never seemed to tire. I claimed a corner table near the map collection and printed and hole-punched and assembled packets like a teacher with a crush on process. I slid the pages into manila envelopes. I wrote addresses with a pen that didn't ask for attention. When I licked the seals, the taste transported me to elementary school Valentine's Day. Pink construction paper and the kind of sincerity that doesn't yet know it can be used against you. On the drive to the Pflugerville ISD Administration Building, Mopac grudgingly gave me lanes. A billboard waved a realtor's smile at me. Call me Judy, I know the neighborhoods. I thought about neighborhoods and about how some of them exist only as networks between people who need each other to keep the world as it is. The admin building in Pflugerville lives near a baseball diamond and a water tower that declares itself for the town. The flag out front was halfway up and clinging to itself against a wind that didn't insist. Inside, a receptionist in a cardigan with tiny embroidered cherries asked how she could help.
I need to submit this, I said, sliding the envelope like a pizza box across the counter. Public Information Act request. Her eyebrows lifted, not alarmed, curious, like a sparrow spotting something shiny. We usually do these by email, she said, friendly, practical. You can save a stamp. Already emailed, I said, thought I'd give the paper a head start. She took it with a kind of respect that made me want to cry. Not because of the envelope, because of the idea that a person could hand another person a record and be understood. On the way out, a group of 7th graders filed past, backpacks slung, voices on the cusp of changing. One kid had hair that fell into his eyes like a secret he didn't yet know how to keep. They smelled like gum and hope and the faint athletic musk of gym. A teacher said, "Keep your hands to yourself, please," in a tone that indicated she'd deployed the phrase 600 times and it still worked. I had the absurd urge to intercept each of them and ask if they knew that sometimes adults cheat and the only corrective is paperwork. Back in the car, I called Marisol from the lot and we did logistics. "I'm sending you the OIG draft," she said. "I tightened language on the outcomes mismatch and added the statutory sites you didn't ask for but will thank me for later." "I always thank you for later," I said. "I submitted the SEC tip as well," she went on. "Anonymous with contact info only to counsel. There's overlap if investor updates went out with those massaged outcomes. We're not shouting fraud in a theater, we're inviting the ushers to turn on the lights."
What about the board? I asked. We'll wait 48 hours post-OIG filing, she said. Then we send your internal memo to the General Counsel and CC the independent chair. We attach exhibits, we ask the board to preserve documents, we call it a protected disclosure. We are not seeking a response, we are putting them on notice. They will open an internal investigation, or they will pretend to, which is fine. Meanwhile, you do not talk to press. At all. Sienna is press, I said. That's unfortunate family labor, not press, Marisol said. Don't give her anything. Assume she's wearing a wire, metaphorically if not literally. I drove home the long way down Deso, through the parts of Austin that still remember they were once themselves before the Cranes took up permanent residence. A billboard for a personal injury lawyer assured me that we answer 24/7. I thought about answering around the clock and about being on call for other people's hurt as a business model. I turned into the HEB parking lot not because I needed anything, but because the fluorescent familiarity of it felt like a sanctuary. I wandered aisles and put a jar of pickles into my cart and then took it out. I paused at the bakery to watch a woman with inked flowers down her forearm pipe frosting onto a sheet cake that said, "Congrats, grad," and understood that the world would keep producing milestones whether or not I was invited to any of them. In the afternoon, I took a call from a number I didn't recognize because curiosity is my god. "Eliza," the voice said, bright with manufactured normal. "It's Sienna. Can we coffee today, please?" "Do you want to apologize again?" I said. "Or do you want to manage me?" A small breath. "Maybe both," she said. Hotel San Jose, 3. Hotel San Jose's courtyard is a hypothesis about how adults should feel at mid-afternoon. Dappled shade, galvanized steel planters, the quiet clink of ice in glass. I wore a shirt that made me look like someone who owns a calendar. Sienna arrived in a dress the color of new leaves, the kind of green that flatters people who think they were made to be looked at. She sat and folded her hands like a student preparing to recite. Her eyes did the wet thing and then made a hard choice and dried. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you don't need to hear it again, but I don't get to start anywhere else. You could start with the part where you tell me why you texted Dylan from my house in January and then lay down on my couch and told me I was the bravest person you knew," I said. "Not cruel, just accurate."
She inhaled like a swimmer turning to find air. "I was trying to be two people," she said. "The one who loved you and the one who loved him. Turns out I'm not a magician." "You're not," I said, and let the line sit there like a neutral object. "Why am I here?" She tapped her fingers against the sweating glass of her iced tea. The nails were trimmed, unpainted, a tell I'd learned. Sienna only left them bare when she needed to touch something without leaving evidence. "The board is nervous," she said, tone down-tuned to confidential. "There's chatter. Investors like to pretend they don't gossip, and then they gossip. Someone is using words like misrepresentation and grant compliance and whistle. If you feel wronged, there are ways to resolve this without burning your life down. They're willing to sweeten your severance, advisory title for the next quarter, a press release framing your exit as a sabbatical. You walk away whole. You're not a story." She smiled like a person offering a life raft that she herself had punctured. "You're asking me to be paid to stop telling the truth?" I said, and took a small pleasure in the way the sentence knifed through the humidity. "I'm asking you not to make a mistake you can't take back," she said. "You will become a person people cross the street to avoid. They'll say you're difficult. They'll say you wanted revenge. They'll say you didn't understand the pressure. You won't get to take the part of you that loves making things and put it back in a room where people let it matter." "I already became a person someone crossed the street to avoid," I said. "I'm adapting." She leaned forward, elbows on knees, and for a half second I saw the girl on my dorm floor who'd cried over a C in a class she didn't even like because it made her feel like the story she told herself about her own competence had a hole in it. "Dylan is not a monster," she said. "I know," I said. "Monsters are rare. Systems are everywhere.
Systems built of people who prefer the word optics to the word ethics. Systems that reward men who can smile while saying, "We'll reconcile in Q4 when we have more bodies." The phrase made her flinch. It was not a flinch of surprise. It was the flinch of recognition. "Eliza," she said, "you've always been better than theatrics. Don't be sloppy. If this is about the schools, let the schools fix it. Don't drag HHS into something they don't have the time to." "This is about records," I said, "not theater. Don't confuse calm with consent." Silence moved into the space between us and unpacked its things. I watched a couple in wide-brimmed hats decide they were hungry enough to share fries. I watched a man in a conference badge pretend to ignore a call from a number he owed money to. Sienna's face softened into something like surrender. "I didn't know about the 2-minute clock," she said, and it rang true. "I would have put my body in the doorway for that." "You can still," I said. She shook her head once. "I would be fired," she said. "I would lose my health insurance. My mother's on mine." "Your mother is on your health insurance because my husband and I subsidized your premiums while we let a school district believe a 14-year-old was getting triaged faster than he was," I said. "Pick a pronoun and live with it." The server came and asked if we wanted anything else. We both said no, like we were in a play and the line had been scripted. "Please, don't do this," she said softly, and I thought she meant don't report. I realized she meant don't make me choose. I put cash on the table, more than the tea. I stood. "I'm not doing this to you," I said. "I'm doing this near you. The world is bigger than the story where we are the main characters." On my way to the car, I passed South Congress boutiques hawking candles named after feelings and T-shirts that make a joke of Texas. A busker polished a song into the air, and a child deposited $1 like an initiation. I put my hand on my sternum and felt my heart like a hummingbird in a barn. At home, my inbox held a message from legal@kindlyminds.com. The subject line, "Notice of Obligations and Reservation of Rights." Joel, with a digital signature and a paragraph that ached to be intimidating. It reminded me of my non-disparagement obligations and my duty to return company property, and hinted, in the elegant language of people who don't like to be explicit, that the company would pursue all available remedies for defamation. Marisol's reply to my forwarded version arrived 2 minutes later. "Do not respond. They know you're represented. They're papering. This is pre-litigation chest beating. It also tells me our scent has reached their porch. Good." I took a shower I didn't need because I craved the choreography of shampoo, condition, rinse, the little order my hands could impose on a day that had unspooled. In the mirror, my face looked like someone who knew how to say, "I'll wait." My phone buzzed with a "love you, kiddo" from my father in Ohio, sent at a time of day when he often stood in a parking lot behind the auto parts store where he consulted sometimes, and smoked without telling his answer. I called. He answered on the second ring, his voice the same combination of gravel and grace I grew up on. "Liz," he said, "how's our weather?" "Like it, dog, you can't tell if you can trust," I said. "You?" "Ohio in spring," he said. "Everything's muddy or about to be."
We did the dance we do. Small talk, check-ins, the exchange of harmless facts like stones in a pocket. Then he said, "You sound like you're standing on a dock looking at a lake you know is cold." "That's almost eerily accurate," I said. "I'm about to send something that will make my life more complicated and less dishonest." He made a humming noise that meant he wasn't going to give advice he wasn't qualified to give. "When I started going to meetings," he said, "there was this old boy Henry who'd say, 'Make amends to the truth, not to people.' Pissed me off for a year because the people were the ones I'd hurt. But he was right. If you take care of the truth will walk you to the right doorstep. May not be the fancy one you wanted, but it'll open." "Blessed are the receipts," I said. "Blessed are the receipts," he echoed without asking for an explanation. "Hey, you remember when you were 7 and I took you to that county fair and you wanted to ride the Ferris wheel and then you got to the top and panicked and I said, 'We'll go around once more and if you still don't like it, we'll get off'? I remember you saying, 'Look outward, it helps,'" I said. "Still works," he said. "I love you, don't go it alone." "I got a lawyer," I said. "Good," he said. "Get two. Get God if you can find him." After we hung up, I took the OIG draft that Marisol had marked into a finished thing. I read it out loud to the plant on the windowsill and corrected the places where my voice tripped. I attached the exhibits with file names that told the truth before anyone even opened them. I CC'd Marisol and did not see anyone else because this was not for anyone else. I hit send. The whoosh noise my email client makes when it sends felt cheap for the gravity of the action, and also exactly right. This is what it is to live in 2023. All our moral acts are often accompanied by cartoon sound effects. For an hour, the world didn't change. I put laundry in the washer, I wiped down the counters, I scrolled past 3 different posts on Nextdoor about a suspicious man in a hoodie, and one about a woman selling a crib that had raised our twins and deserves a good home. I let the smallness of other people's concerns refresh me. Then my phone blinked. HHSOIG hotline, intake confirmation. A case number. A sentence that said, "A representative may contact you for additional information." The email had no warmth and no threat. It was a door closing and another opening at the same time. In the evening, Marta from 3C knocked with the kind of knock that tells you the person on the other side isn't sure if you nap. I let her in and handed her the internal memo I drafted for the board. She took it to the table like a surgeon and read it once, then again, with a pencil she took from behind her ear. "You did most of my work for me," she said, not unkind. "You should be an auditor. You'd hate it, and you'd be great at it." She circled 3 sentences. "Here," she said, "you say falsified. I'd go with inaccurate as evidenced by X and Y. Let the exhibits call it. And here, this is your lead. On date, Kindly Minds changed the trigger for its 2-minute escalation metric from user press to triage open, resulting in delays of 3 to 6 minutes for high-risk student outreach, contrary to contractual commitments. Put it up top. Then do your footnote song and dance. And this paragraph where you say, 'I am heartbroken,' save it for your journal. It's not that I don't believe you, it's that people like Joel stop reading when they see a feeling." "I know," I said. I wanted to sneak it in like a person putting a note in a bottle and tossing it into a courtroom. "Save your bottles," she said, pressing my hand. We sat for a while and didn't talk, listening to the building's Thursday night noise, the thud of someone's bass, the shouts of a game on 2 floors up. Marta told me about a grant she chased once that turned out to be a math error multiplied by ego. She told me about the satisfaction of turning over a rock and watching something poisonous scuttle away. "You don't have to smash it," she said. "You just have to let the sun do its thing." At 11, I sent the internal memo to legal@kindlyminds.com and board@kindlyminds.com and CC'd the general counsel's direct email and the independent chair, a woman named Evelyn Cho, who had once spoken at a panel I moderated and said, "Governance is not a vibe." Subject line, "Protected disclosure, Kindly Minds grant reporting and safety net response time changes." I put the sentence Marta had edited at the top. I attached exhibits, numbered. I asked them to preserve all communications. I stated that I was represented and included Marisol's contact. Then I closed my laptop and felt like I'd set a bowl on a high shelf and dared someone to knock it down. I slept in a way that passes for sleeping when your nervous system is set to alert, waking at 2:17 and again at 4:03, reading a page of a book about trees and forgetting it immediately, getting up to drink water I didn't need. In the shoelace of time right before dawn, I dreamed of a school hallway that went on forever and a door at the end that kept stepping back each time I stepped forward. In the dream, I stopped walking. I turned to the wall to my left and pressed until a hidden panel released, and behind it, a bright square of morning. I woke to an email from Joel at 6:11 a.m. with a subject line that tried hard to be unfazed. "Protected disclosure." "We take all reports seriously," he wrote. "We have engaged outside counsel to conduct an investigation and will cooperate fully with any agency inquiries. Kindly confirm you will return all company property and refrain from further accessing company systems." I forwarded it to Marisol, who replied with a thumbs up emoji and then a more lawyerly paragraph that meant, good, they're scared enough to hire someone whose business card lists white collar before litigation. Dylan texted at 7:02, we need to talk. I stared at the words the way you stare at a fire and decide whether to put water on it or let it eat itself. Not without counsel, I wrote back. He pinged with a single word that used to sound like love and now sounded like an angle. Please. I put my phone face down. I took my coffee out to the stoop and watched a mockingbird do an impression of a car alarm that was better than most car alarms. A woman jogged past in a t-shirt that said, nevertheless she persisted, and I understood, as if in translation, that persistence and revenge are siblings, but they don't go to the same schools. What I was doing wasn't revenge. It was putting all the cards face up on the table and inviting the dealer to count. Somebody, somewhere in an office with good glass, would spend their morning deciphering my exhibits. Someone on a school district IT team would dig for escalation logs. Someone at HHS OIG would decide whether the words material misrepresentation deserved a calendar invite. Life, in the meantime, would insist on itself. Eggs to be scrambled, a plant to be rotated so it didn't scorch on one side, a loose screw in a cabinet to be tightened with a coin because the screwdriver lived in a box marked garage we didn't have. I thought of Priya, likely clocked in already, half watching a new intake dashboard while sitting in a waiting room where her mother slept a little too hard. I thought of Sienna, walking to work across a plaza with public art and private dread. I thought of Dylan, looking at himself in the mirror, practicing the expression that most efficiently deflected reality. I hoped he practiced a new one, the face a man makes when the world asks him to be specific. At 9 on the dot, my phone rang. A 202 area code. I let it go to voicemail, and then, because I'm not a masochist, I listened. A man with a voice like gravel smoothed with policy thanked me for my submission and asked for a time to speak. He said words like follow-up, clarify, timeline. He signed off with a first name that almost certainly wasn't his first name. I texted Marisol. She wrote back, will prep, breathe, do not embellish, do not be intimidated by their lack of adjectives. I set my phone down. I breathed. The air went in and it went out. A small bird on the fence did something that looked like a bow, and I bowed back, a woman alone on a stoop in Austin, Texas, kneeling before the god of bureaucracy and finding, to her surprise, that it felt like prayer. The federal building on San Jacinto felt like every federal building I've ever been in. Gray carpet that had seen the bottoms of the same kind of shoes for decades, lighting that refused to flatter, a seal on the wall that said your feelings didn't matter here, and that was the point. Marisol met me in the lobby with a folder and a nod. We took the elevator up with a man who said nothing and clutched a USPS package like it contained a small breakable nation. In the conference room, the man from the voicemail had a face that matched his voice, lined in a way that suggested long days that didn't apologize for their length. He introduced himself as Sam. There was another person with him, a woman with neat hair and a yellow legal pad who said, I'm Anne, and did not say who she was with. They poured tap water into paper cups. They asked me to start at the beginning, then asked me to stop and back up, then asked me to go forward again. It felt less like telling a story and more like pulling thread through specific points on fabric while the shape of the pattern emerged for them, not me. The federal building on San Jacinto felt like every federal building I've ever been in. Gray carpet that had seen the bottoms of the same kind of shoes for decades, lighting that refused to flatter, a seal on the wall that said your feelings didn't matter here, and that was the point. Marisol met me in the lobby with a folder and a nod. We took the elevator up with a man who said nothing and clutched a USPS package like it contained a small breakable nation. In the conference room, the man from the voicemail had a face that matched his voice, lined in a way that didn't apologize for their length. He introduced himself as Sam. There was another person with him, a woman with neat hair and a yellow legal pad who said, I'm Anne, and did not say who she was with. They poured tap water into paper cups. They asked me to start at the beginning, then asked me to stop and back up, then asked me to go forward again. It felt less like telling a story and more like pulling thread through specific points on fabric while the shape of the pattern emerged for them, not me. I told them about the grant, the outcomes, the mismatch with the raw data. I told them about the reconcile in Q4 when we have more bodies comment and how a phrase can hold a company's soul if you let it. I told them about the safety net clocks that had been moved and about Priya's logs and the escalation window that had turned into a mirror for everyone's priorities. I didn't say betrayal, I said change in trigger point. I didn't say husband, I said CFO. I did not bring adjectives where a noun would do. Sam's face didn't change when I mentioned school districts, but I watched him write something 3 times in the corner of his page and then circle it once, hard. When I said, we promised 2 minutes, he nodded like a person who had heard promises before and filed them in a drawer labeled danger. Thank you, he said when I finally reached the edge of the map. We'll need copies of the exhibits. Council can coordinate. We may need your cooperation going forward. Do not discuss this outside council. Do not access any more company systems. He paused as if considering whether to add something human, then said, what you did today is useful. Useful, I repeated, and let the word seat itself. Outside, a student crossed against the light because that's what we do when we're young enough to think laws are a suggestion. I stood with Marisol in the wind that pretended to be a personality and let my body discover that it could be done shaking now. She put a hand on my elbow, a touch light enough to be mistaken for weather. Good, she said. You were very boring. That is praise. We crossed the street to a coffee shop that had named drinks after writers who would have hated the commercialization of their names. I ordered a glass of water to replace the one I hadn't finished upstairs. My phone vibrated with an email from Fluggerville ISD. RE Peer Request Acknowledgement. A timeline. A note about searching for responsive documents. 2 hours later, Del Valle sent theirs. The world of forms and deadlines was moving, slowly but unmistakably, in our direction. After lunch, outside counsel for Kindly Minds reached out. Greer and Marston LLP, a Dallas firm with a website that used the phrase, trusted to navigate complexity. They set a time for an interview, voluntary, they said, and I translated it to documented. The invitation CC'd Joel. It CC'd a junior associate so young you could feel their law school loans breathing through the screen. Marisol wrote back that I'd be happy to appear, and my stomach did a small rebellious roll at the word happy. Priya left me a voicemail between shifts at the hospital and home where her mother slept through sitcoms. They've started asking for logs, she said, voice tight. Ops is pinging on Slack. Let's align on definitions before we engage. I took screenshots of the pre-Slack edit. Is it weird that I feel lighter? Like being terrified is a kind of cardio? At 6, the Fluggerville School Board meeting streamed on YouTube with a chat that quickly devolved into a debate over the usefulness of homework. The agenda tucked vendor performance under new business. A district administrator presented contract excerpts, a calm voice saying calm words, service levels, escalation time, outcomes reporting. And then a counselor, hair pulled into a bun that meant she'd been working, stood for her allotted 3 minutes to say, I'm not here to throw stones, but when we promise a kid help in 2 minutes and it's 6, that kind of math is the difference between me sleeping and not sleeping. Her throat tightened, but her voice didn't break. I watched the board members make the faces of people mentally doing trigonometry and calling it compassion. They voted to pause the contract pending review. Simple as a hand raise. Manuscript history in the making if you were paying attention. The next morning, Greer and Marston's conference room had a view of Dallas freeways braided like a myth. The lead partner, a woman named Stephanie Greer with a jawline that owed its existence to the word resolve, shook my hand and deployed the smile of a person who tries to buy your trust with wattage. She asked if I was comfortable. I said yes. She read into the record that this was an internal review and not a deposition. Everyone wrote that down. And then we began. They wanted my documents, which she called materials, like they had fallen from the sky and not from the hour of my life I'd given each of them. They wanted to know who else knew what and when. They wanted to know if I harbored ill will. I said I harbored a preference for valid baselines. I watched a junior attorney's mouth twitch as if he was sidling up to a smile and then thought better of it. Did you ever express concerns internally prior to your termination? Stephanie asked. I asked questions, I said.
I put a comment on a Jira ticket asking why our active user metric had been redefined. I asked in the #metrics channel what accounted for a sudden jump in mood reports. I flagged a discrepancy to my manager. I did not use the word fraud because I am careful with language I can't support. She nodded. "You understand the gravity of the term," she said. And I heard, "You understand how we intend to avoid it."
When we broke, I stood in the hallway and watched Dylan through the glass in another conference room. Red tie loosened, white shirt too bright for a man who wanted to be made of nuance. He gestured in the way he did when he needed his hands to demonstrate an idea his words couldn't contain. Sienna sat beside him, face a study in neutrality, hair pulled back like armor. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. We both held perfectly still so we could pretend we didn't know that stillness is a move. The next day, Kindly Minds appoints interim CFO, establishes independent compliance committee, hit the company's website with a picture of a woman in glasses who looked like she never let a number get away from her. The press release was an exercise in the passive voice, my old enemy. Mistakes were made, commitments to improvement were underscored, community partners were valued. Dylan was stepping away to spend time with family. My hands trembled when I read it, not because I was celebrating, but because I recognized the exact radius of the consequences they were prepared to admit. The comments on LinkedIn were disorienting in their cheer. Proud of this leadership. Transparency matters. The world likes to prefer stories with nice arcs. I was preparing for the long arithmetic. A week later, HHS OIG emailed asking for a follow-up call to clarify. Sam's voice on the line was calm, indifferent to my hunger for a verdict. "We are coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office," he said. "There will be document preservation requests. Please let counsel know." He did not say, "You did a good thing." He did not say, "We'll make this right." He said, "We are proceeding." The comfort was in the noun. The Texas Public Information Act did what it does when functionaries respect it. It delivered. From Pflugerville, a stack of PDFs, contract, addendum, emails with subject lines like SLA clarification, where a Kindly Minds rep, someone junior, all "hey there" and emojis, asked if the district would be open to aligning on clock start to reflect internal workflows. The district had replied, wary but accommodating, "Please ensure student experience is unchanged." The internal workflows had changed what mattered, and everyone had told themselves they were protecting students while protecting the spreadsheet. From Del Val, a memorandum from a principal describing a student whose help button produced a returned call at 4 minutes 52 seconds. A note, "Parent upset," escalated to Mr. Romero. I printed the documents and highlighted and wanted to cross-stitch 452 on a pillow and then tear the pillow apart. Stephanie from Greer and Marston asked to talk again. This time, she didn't mention ill will. She asked to see my notes about the board meeting I had watched. "We are taking this seriously," she said, the way a person at a funeral says, "Let me know if you need anything," because it is what the living say when faced with the dead. "Is Dylan responsible?" I asked her quietly, not because I expected an answer, but because I wanted to see what her face would do with the question. "Our mandate is to evaluate processes and controls," she said. "At the end of the day, people make choices. Boards set tones, organizations need to build rails that make it easy to make good choices and hard to make bad ones." "Does he keep his money?" I asked, not because I thought it would change anything about my day, but because I wanted to name the thing we all pretend we don't notice. Her jaw moved as if she were chewing old gum. "That depends on whether the board feels like they can claw back anything under their policies," she said. "It depends on what OIG and DOJ want. It depends on math." It was almost sweet to hear someone invoke math as a moral. Priya didn't call for 3 days. When she did, it was to tell me she had given her notice, effective immediately, and had an offer at a community clinic that would pay less but let her sleep. "I'll pick up weekend shifts," she said, practical and brave. "My mother says she likes the view from the new waiting room better. The art isn't trying so hard." "Bless your mother's taste," I said. "Come over." She did.
We ate takeout on the floor because the table felt like a place where things needed to be sorted, and at that moment, I wanted to be a person who didn't sort. We said we were angry, and then we said we were tired, and then we decided that those were not opposing truths. We drank ginger ale because it was all I had cold. Before she left, she put a hand on the stack of printed PDFs and said, "Thank you for turning this into homework. Homework I can do." A letter from DOJ arrived by regular mail, which felt both archaic and deeply official. It used my name without a miss or a mess. It informed me that a complaint had been filed under seal, that the United States was electing to intervene. I read the sentence twice, then 3 times, and then I pressed my palm to the page as if it had a temperature. I thought of how long this would take, of settlements and corrective action plans, and the dull municipal cadence of parties agree, and it felt correct, like the spine on a book that had always intended to bear this exact weight. I sent Marisol a photo. She called and said, "We're not there yet, but we are on a road." She sounded almost happy and too careful to let happiness jinx anything.
Sienna asked to meet again, and I said yes, because I'm not a person who can say no to a person I once shared a bathroom with at 19. We met at a park in Hyde Park where the live oaks lean in like a secret. She looked different, which is to say she looked like herself without the filter of my love for her. She handed me an envelope and said, "It's not yours. It's a copy of what I sent to Stephanie, a declaration." Inside, dates, decisions, and acknowledgement that she had been present for conversations where a choice was made to prioritize optics over operations. She didn't accuse, she didn't absolve. She put her name next to her memory. "I'm leaving," she said. "My mother can move in with my aunt for a while. I'll contract with the city. Crisis comes for the health department. Or, I don't know, do you think there's a version of us that can exist again?" I wanted there to be, and I wanted there not to be, and both desires were honest enough to make me sit down on the bench and breathe into the middle of my body like they teach you in yoga classes I never went back to. "There's a version where you existed in my life that I will always be grateful for," I said. "There's not a version of back." She nodded like a person who'd already heard the words in her own mouth and needed to try them out on someone else's ears. "I'm sorry," she said again, "because some people believe in saying the thing until it becomes a bridge." We did not hug. We looked like we might, and then we didn't. When she left, the space she took with her was not the size of a person. It was the size of a decade. Dylan appeared one night like a ghost that hasn't figured out the rules of haunting. He stood in the corridor with his hands empty, which is how boys think you can prove you mean no harm. "I'm losing everything," he said, and the phrase hit me with no force at all because I knew that what he meant by everything was a set of privileges he had not had to see until someone turned off the lights and told him to find them again. "You're losing a job," I said, "and a reputation you built on sand." "They're going to come after me," he said. "They're going to make me a headline." "The only headline I care about is a kid in Fluggerville who doesn't have to wait 4 minutes and 52 seconds for someone to call him back," I said. "If you want to be brave, be specific. Tell them what you did. Tell them why. Then sit down." He looked at me like I had stepped onto a language he didn't speak. After a minute, he said, "Do you remember the Blanco River? The rock with the white scar?" And I realized that he was trying to share a memory as currency. The exchange rate had tanked. "Take care of yourself," I said, "and don't call me without going through my lawyer." It sounded mechanical. It sounded like me surviving. The settlement came a year later because that's how calendars operate when they're in the hands of the federal government. Kindly Minds admitted no wrongdoing because that is the phrase you use when you agree to write a check with many zeros and hire a monitor and live under a corporate integrity agreement that makes your accountants learn new prayers. They paid back a portion of the grant and an additional sum that wasn't called a fine but behaved like one. The press release landed on a Tuesday. The Austin American-Statesman picked it up with a headline that made me wince for its attempt at cleverness. The comments on social media were predictable and not useful.
The important part happened in rooms no one live-streamed. School district meetings where the renewal votes were no. A new RFP where response time was described with language even a bot couldn't misinterpret. A line in a quarterly update to the board at a company that had learned the hard way to count what mattered.
I took a job that looked small and felt the right size. UT's iSchool, adjunct, a seminar on ethical product metrics and what happens when incentives and outcomes divorce. 10 students who thought they were there to talk about dashboards and came every week ready to talk about dignity. I moonlit with a legal aid group, writing decision trees for people trying to navigate safety nets without bleeding out from paper cuts. On Wednesdays, I swam at Barton Springs and let the cold remind me that I had nerve endings. On Saturdays, I went to the HOA meetings and voted for the compost pilot and against Hank's desire to make sure the rulebook had a rule about pool floats exceeding 3 feet in diameter. Priya's mother stabilized. They learned the names of all the nurses and brought empanadas on holidays. Priya started sleeping with a cat pressed like a comma against the back of her knees. She sent me occasional photos of sunsets with no captions because some beauty is explicit and doesn't need sequel. Marta audited a grant for a nonprofit in San Marcos and called me from their parking lot to say, "You want to see the worst labeling system I've ever seen?" and then laughed until she coughed. We started having dinner on Thursdays. She taught me to make arroz con pollo that tasted like a reason to throw a party. We didn't throw parties, but we talked about the kind of world where we might. My father flew in once, a winter weekend when Austin pretended to be Ohio for a day, and I almost felt bad about the disappointment. We sat on the back steps and ate barbecue from a place in a gas station, and he said, apropos of nothing, "I told Henry at group about you." And I said, "What did Henry say?" And he said, "Make amends to the truth isn't a one-time thing, it's the only thing." We clinked Shiner Box and watched a squirrel commit to a jump that shouldn't have worked, and did. Sometimes I walk past the building where Kindly Minds used to be and feel nothing, which is an underrated sensation. Sometimes I think of Sienna in a city office somewhere, building statements that might make terrible days survivable. Sometimes I think of Dylan in a quiet house working for a private equity shop in a role that doesn't come with a microphone. I don't read his updates. I no longer live in the version of the world where that matters. On a day that feels like an ending and a beginning, because all days do if you tilt them right, I go back to Barton Springs at opening again. The line is short, the water is the kind of cold that tricks your body into gratitude. I swim the length, and when I reach the far wall, I hang there, fingers curled over slick concrete, lungs greedily negotiating, and I say, in my head but with conviction, "Blessed are the receipts. Blessed is the law that made room for a consequence. Blessed is the boredom of doing the next right thing. Blessed are the kids who press help, and this time don't wait as long. Blessed are the women who decide that the story where they are wronged is only a first chapter. Blessed is the day after." When I climb out, the sun catches on the water and throws 1,000 small coins against the wall. I don't collect any of them. I dry off. I go home. On the table, a stack of student papers waits, a short line of names like prayers. I sharpen a pencil and sit down to the work of telling people the parts of the truth that can be taught.